Mark Carter enjoyed the calm of his suburban neighborhood, a place where children played freely on sidewalks and neighbors exchanged friendly greetings over garden fences. As a Navy SEAL veteran and devoted father, Mark valued this peace deeply. His mornings often began with quiet moments, watching his young son, Ethan, chase butterflies in their backyard while sipping his coffee. That day was no different at first. The sun filtered softly through the trees and birds sang their usual songs. Mark had just settled onto the porch with his laptop, intending to catch up on some work while keeping an eye on Ethan. Suddenly, his attention snapped toward the driveway. Two men approached the front door, dressed in dark polo shirts with badges clipped to their belts. They looked official at first glance, but something about their movements seemed off, too deliberate, too tense. Mark's military instincts kicked in immediately. He watched closely as the men paused, exchanging quiet words before one stepped forward and knocked firmly on the door. Mark called out, "Can I help you?" The taller man flashed a badge that caught the sunlight but didn't reflect the kind of security or law enforcement Mark was used to seeing. "We're representatives of the Homeowners Association," the man said, voice steady but somewhat rehearsed. "We need to speak with you about a neighborhood matter involving your child." Mark's brows furrowed. "My child? What kind of matter?" The men exchanged glances. "There have been some concerns about certain activities on this street, and we're here to ensure all families are following the guidelines. We need to have a brief conversation." Mark felt a protective tension tighten in his chest. Something wasn't right. The men's badges didn't have the official logos or clear identification he expected. Their tone was polite but firm, lacking warmth. "May I see your identification?" Mark asked, stepping toward the door but keeping a firm hand on the frame. The shorter man fumbled with a wallet, pulling out cards that looked printed rather than issued. "These are HOA credentials," he said. But the hesitation in his voice made Mark suspicious. Mark stepped back, signaling to Ethan inside to stay close. "I haven't seen any notices about this," he said calmly but firmly. "You'll need to contact the HOA office officially. Till then, I can't discuss anything here." The men's expressions tightened. "We have authority to address urgent concerns," the taller man insisted. Mark's mind raced. He could tell from their body language this was more than a routine visit. The calm neighborhood he loved suddenly felt less safe. He glanced around, spotting the small security camera he had installed near the front porch after moving in. The camera's presence might be a deterrent, but Mark knew it wouldn't stop determined trouble. He quietly moved to the side of the porch, pulling out his phone to record the interaction. "Look," Mark said evenly, "I'm not comfortable with this visit without proper verification. Please leave or I'll have to call the police." The men hesitated, clearly unsettled by Mark's composed but firm stance. Suddenly, the shorter man's tone shifted. "We need to take your child for his safety. There have been reports that require immediate action." Mark's heart pounded. "No, my son is safe with me. You're not taking him anywhere." The taller man stepped forward, reaching out as if to grab Ethan. In a split second, Mark's years of training took over. He stepped between his son and the man, voice low but commanding. "Step back." The would-be enforcer froze, surprised by the sudden firmness. Mark assessed the situation. The men were bluffing, trying to intimidate a family with false authority. But Mark wasn't one to back down. He squared his shoulders, steady and calm. "I'm giving you one last chance. Leave now." The tension in the air was thick. Neighbors peeked from windows and porches, sensing something was wrong but unsure what. Mark's protective instincts flared. He was ready to defend his family however necessary. The men looked at each other, realizing their plan was unraveling. Mark's quiet neighborhood had been interrupted, but he was prepared to face whatever came next. The men stood frozen for a moment, their confidence clearly shaken by Mark's unwavering stance. Mark's eyes never left them, his protective instincts sharp and ready. He knew that these strangers were no ordinary visitors, and his military training urged him to stay calm but alert. Ethan, clutching his small toy truck, looked up at his father, sensing the seriousness in the air but trusting Mark completely. Mark gave his son a reassuring nod, silently telling him to stay close and stay calm. The taller man swallowed hard, clearly trying to regain control. "Look, this doesn't have to get complicated. Just want to make sure your son is safe," he said, voice slightly less firm now. Mark's mind raced. Their story didn't add up. No real authority would act this way without proper procedures, especially with a child involved. His gut told him these men were dangerous. Without breaking eye contact, Mark slowly reached inside his jacket pocket and felt the familiar weight of his phone. He discreetly started recording the encounter, knowing every second could count if things escalated. The shorter man's eyes flicked to Mark's phone. "Okay?" And for a brief second, panic flashed across his face. "Put that away," he hissed, but Mark ignored the warning. The tension thickened like a tightening rope. Mark's muscles tensed, ready to react at a moment's notice. "Why are you really here?" Mark asked, voice low but steady. "Who sent you?" Neither man answered. Instead, they exchanged uneasy glances. Suddenly, the taller man took a step forward, attempting to close the distance. "We're here for the safety of the neighborhood. We can handle this quietly, or it can get messy," he said. Mark didn't flinch. "No one's taking my child without proof and proper authority," he said firmly. "Leave now, or I will call the police." Behind Mark, a few neighbors had stepped out, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. The men noticed this growing audience and hesitated. Their plan was clearly unraveling. Mark's training sharpened. He knew intimidation was their tactic, hoping to scare him into compliance. But fear had no place here. The shorter man lunged suddenly, trying to grab Ethan's hand. Mark's reflexes were instantaneous. With calm precision, Mark intercepted, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting gently but firmly, halting the move. The man grimaced but didn't struggle much. It was clear they hadn't expected resistance. Mark's voice was steady but carried authority. "Back off." The taller man stepped forward again, but Mark didn't back down. His body was ready to protect his family at all costs. Neighbors began pulling out phones, recording and calling authorities as the scene unfolded. Mark's focus narrowed. He scanned the men, looking for weaknesses or signs of real authority. There were none. One of the men tried a desperate move, reaching toward his belt. Mark quickly grabbed his arm, preventing any sudden action. "Enough," Mark said firmly, keeping his voice controlled. "This ends now." The men exchanged a look of defeat. They were outmatched not just physically, but mentally. Mark loosened his grip slightly, but kept them at bay. "Leave my property." Slowly, the men backed away, their bravado replaced by caution. Mark turned immediately to Ethan, pulling him close. "You're safe," he whispered. "No one's going to take you." As soon as the imposters retreated down the driveway, the neighborhood began buzzing with activity. Calls to the local police were flooding in. Mark dialed emergency services, calmly explaining the situation. The dispatcher assured him that officers were on their way. While waiting, Mark kept Ethan close, scanning the street for any further threats. The neighbors gathered, some offering support, others sharing worried looks. Mark's heart remained steady. His training had prepared him for danger. But nothing compared to the responsibility he felt for this child. He realized the incident was more than a random threat. It was a warning sign. Someone had tried to use fear and false authority to break into their lives as the sound of sirens approached. Mark knew this was only the beginning. But with his family safe and his resolve stronger than ever, he was ready to face whatever came next. The arrival of the police brought a wave of relief to the small crowd gathered around Mark's home. Officers stepped out of their vehicles with calm professionalism, ready to take control of the situation. Mark briefed them quickly, explaining the details of the encounter with the men posing as HOA enforcers. As officers spoke with the imposters, Mark kept Ethan close, gently rubbing his son's back. Ethan was shaken but safe, his bright eyes wide as he clung to his father. Mark's presence was a steady anchor in the storm. The police officers inspected the men's fake badges and identification cards. One officer shook his head slowly. "These aren't legitimate. Looks like you were right to be cautious." Mark nodded quietly. "They tried to convince me they had authority to take my son. I knew something was wrong the moment they showed up." The officers promised to investigate further and took the men into custody for questioning. Meanwhile, neighbors began to chatter, some coming forward to share similar stories of suspicious visits or strange encounters in recent weeks. Mark realized the incident was part of a larger, more troubling pattern. The calm neighborhood he loved was facing an unusual threat. Despite the worry, Mark remained focused. He thanked the officers and returned inside, closing the door behind him with a sense of resolve. His family's safety was paramount, but he also knew he couldn't let fear control their lives. Later that evening, Mark sat with his wife Claire and Ethan around the dinner table. They spoke quietly about what had happened. Claire's eyes were filled with concern, but also gratitude for Mark's steady calm. "I never imagined something like this could happen here," Claire said softly. Mark nodded. "Neither did I, but we're going to be ready. This family isn't going anywhere." As they talked, Mark's mind turned to the imposters and their motives. Who had sent them? What were they hoping to achieve? The questions lingered, but Mark's military training taught him to move forward, gathering information and preparing for any challenge. Over the next few days, Mark reached out to the neighborhood association, local police, and even private security experts. Together, they started organizing community meetings to raise awareness and improve safety. At one meeting, Mark stood before a crowd of neighbors, sharing what had happened and urging vigilance without fear. "This isn't about paranoia," he said firmly. "It's about being aware and prepared. We protect our families by knowing what's normal and what's not." The community responded with a mix of concern and determination. Many volunteered to help set up neighborhood watch programs, install cameras, and establish communication channels. Mark's experience gave others confidence. They saw how one person's calm action had prevented a potential tragedy. Meanwhile, Mark continued his own investigation. Using contacts from his military days and careful research, he dug deeper into reports of similar imposters targeting families in nearby areas piece by piece. A troubling picture emerged: an organized effort to exploit fear and confusion for unknown reasons. But Mark was not one to back down. Each discovery fueled his determination to protect not only his family, but the entire neighborhood. He trained with renewed focus, maintaining both physical readiness and mental sharpness. Every day, he checked on neighbors, offering guidance and reassurance. In this way, Mark transformed from a quiet veteran to a community guardian, someone who stood between threat and safety with steady resolve. And as the sun set each evening, he felt a quiet confidence. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them head-on. For his family and the people who trusted him, the days following the incident brought a new energy to Mark's neighborhood. Where once there had been complacency, now vigilance filled the air. Mark knew the imposters might try again, or worse, others could attempt similar schemes. Preparation was essential. Mark dedicated time each evening to training. Not just physical drills, but mental exercises to stay sharp. His Navy SEAL background gave him an edge, but he reminded himself that protecting his family required more than strength. It required calm, clear thinking. One afternoon, as Mark and Ethan enjoyed the backyard, Mark noticed a car slowly circling the block. It wasn't unfamiliar, But something about the driver's gaze felt unsettling. Mark's instincts sharpened. He watched as the car stopped near a neighbor's house, the occupants scanning the area. The vehicle didn't match any known residents or official vehicles, without alerting Ethan. Mark quietly moved inside, grabbing his phone. He called the neighborhood watch coordinator, explaining the situation and requesting a check on the vehicle. Minutes later, neighbors began to gather discreetly, coordinating quietly to observe without escalating tension. Mark took a deep breath, steadying himself. The moment called for patience and precision, not impulse. The driver of the suspicious car soon realized they were being watched and sped away, disappearing down the street. Mark's neighbors exchanged relieved looks but knew better than to relax. Too soon. That evening, Mark reviewed footage from his home security cameras. He noted the vehicle's license plate and passed the information to local authorities. While his military training prepared him for action, Mark also valued collaboration. Trust between neighbors and law enforcement was crucial to keeping everyone safe. A few days later, Mark received a call from the police. The vehicle was linked to an individual under investigation for impersonating officials in nearby neighborhoods. Mark felt a surge of satisfaction. His vigilance had helped prevent another incident, but he remained humble. "We're not just fighting for ourselves," he told Claire. "We're standing for everyone around us." The community responded well to Mark's leadership. Local meetings were more frequent, and residents shared tips and concerns openly. Mark also took time to teach self-defense basics at a weekend gathering. Parents and teens attended, eager to learn how to stay safe. He emphasized calm responses and awareness rather than aggression, instilling confidence in those who might face unexpected situations. One day, a neighbor approached Mark with gratitude. "You've changed how we see things," she said. "It's more than safety, it's peace of mind." Mark smiled. That's the goal. Despite the progress, Mark never let his guard down. He continued to study the pattern behind the imposters, piecing together clues and building connections. His military contacts helped uncover that the incidents might be linked to a larger group, exploiting vulnerable communities. Mark shared his findings with law enforcement, helping to strengthen regional efforts against these threats. Meanwhile, life at home slowly returned to a new normal. Ethan played freely again, laughter filling the yard. And Claire found comfort in Mark's steady presence. Still, Mark remained ready. He understood that peace was earned, not given. One afternoon, while fixing a fence post, Mark reflected on how the situation had changed him. What began as a quiet family life had transformed into a mission to protect not just his own but many others. He felt a deep sense of purpose and gratitude for his family, his neighbors, and the strength to face challenges with calm and skill. The neighborhood had become more than a place to live. It was a community fortified by trust, vigilance, and the quiet courage of those who cared deeply. Mark knew the road ahead might hold surprises, but he was ready. After all, protecting what mattered most was a responsibility he welcomed without hesitation. The neighborhood had changed. Where once there was a sense of casual trust, now vigilance wove through daily life like a quiet thread. Thanks to Mark's quick thinking and steady leadership, residents felt more secure, yet aware that true safety required ongoing effort, following the recent discovery of the imposters' links to a wider scheme. Local law enforcement increased patrols, their presence a reassuring reminder that help was near. Mark welcomed these efforts and worked closely with officers, sharing information and updates. One morning, Mark stood outside his home, chatting with a neighbor who had just joined the neighborhood watch. Together, they reviewed patrol schedules and communication plans, determined to build a stronger safety net. "It's amazing how much safer we feel when we look out for each other," the neighbor said. Mark nodded. "It's about community strength. We're only as safe as we are united." Meanwhile, news of the incident spread beyond the neighborhood, catching the attention of nearby communities. Local media featured stories highlighting the importance of vigilance and awareness. showcasing Mark's role as a calm protector. Mark was reluctant to seek the spotlight, but understood that sharing his experience might help others. At home, Mark balanced his growing responsibilities with family life. He made time for Ethan's school events and quiet evenings with Claire, ensuring their family remained the heart of everything. One afternoon, as Ethan practiced riding his bike down the driveway, Mark's eyes scanned the street with practiced alertness. He saw a few familiar faces waving from yards. A testament to the new bonds forming between neighbors, the trust was real. Born from shared experience and collective effort, Mark's neighbors had embraced safety measures, new locks, improved lighting, and regular check-ins. Together, they created a network of care and attention. Yet Mark remained mindful of the challenges ahead. The imposter's true motives were still unclear, and he knew that staying prepared meant never letting guard down. That evening, a community meeting gathered residents in the local recreation center. Mark spoke calmly about the importance of staying informed and supporting one another. Safety isn't a one-time fix, he reminded the crowd. It's a constant commitment. Afterward, neighbors lingered to discuss ideas for future safety initiatives. Plans included neighborhood apps for instant alerts, workshops on emergency preparedness, and buddy systems for families. Mark felt a quiet pride watching the community come together. He had helped spark something important, a sense of ownership and resilience. Days later, Mark received a call from the police department. Investigations into the impersonation ring had made progress, with several arrests and the dismantling of a small network exploiting vulnerable families. The news brought relief, but also a reminder that threats could arise anywhere. Mark used the opportunity to encourage neighbors not to grow complacent. "We celebrate this victory," said in a message to the community, "but we also keep watching, learning, and growing stronger." Back home, Mark found comfort in simple routines. He prepared dinner with Claire, shared stories with Ethan, and took moments to breathe deeply in the quiet evenings. His life had shifted from quiet days to a steady rhythm of vigilance and care. Yet through it all, Mark's focus remained clear. Protect family, support neighbors, and never lose sight of what truly mattered. The neighborhood was safer now, not just because of fences or cameras, but because of the people who refused to let fear divide them. Mark stood on his porch one evening watching the sunset behind the trees. The warmth of the day lingered, and he felt a deep sense of peace. The journey had been unexpected, challenging, and humbling, but it had also been a reminder of the strength found in calm, courage, and shared responsibility. Mark was ready for whatever came next, steadfast, watchful, and quietly determined. Mark sat at the kitchen table, steaming mug of coffee beside him and a notepad filled with scribbled names, dates, and notes. The early morning quiet was a sharp contrast to the work unfolding in front of him. While the neighborhood had settled into a new rhythm of watchfulness, Mark knew the story wasn't over. The recent arrests made headlines in surrounding towns. Law enforcement had dismantled one part of the impersonation ring, but details from the investigation hinted at something larger, more organized and widespread than anyone had guessed. According to a detective Mark had grown to trust, several of the suspects had false documents that matched files found in other parts of the state. The group had posed as everything from utility workers to safety inspectors, often targeting new families or those who kept to themselves. Mark leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen on the table. "They weren't random," he murmured. "They had a method." That thought stuck with him. He pulled up his home security footage from the day of the incident again, reviewing every movement, every hesitation the imposters had made. He paused the video as one of the men glanced at a paper he thought was hidden. Mark zoomed in. There was a partial address on the corner, not his, someone else's. He wrote it down and ran a search. It led to a neighboring community just 2 miles away. Mark didn't waste time. He called the detective and shared what he found. "You might want to check that property," he said. "It could be connected." The detective agreed and promised to follow up. Claire entered the kitchen, her expression soft but concerned. "You're still chasing leads?" Mark gave a small smile. "Just making sure we stay ahead of anything that might come back." She placed her hand on his shoulder. "Just don't carry all of it alone. We're in this together." Her words grounded him. While he had taken on the role of protector, he wasn't alone. The strength of the neighborhood and his family made everything he was doing possible. Later that afternoon, Mark received a call. The address he'd spotted was indeed significant. It had been used as a fake office by the group months ago, abandoned when suspicion arose. Inside, police found notebooks filled with observations about different neighborhoods, including notes on who lived where, which homes had children, and which families seemed the least likely to resist. Mark felt a quiet chill move through him. They had been watched, but now they were watching back. At the next neighborhood safety meeting, Mark shared the latest developments with calm clarity. "We now know this wasn't just a one-time incident. But the good news is your awareness and teamwork helped stop something much bigger." The community responded with a renewed sense of unity. Volunteers offered to coordinate with other neighborhoods, sharing what they had learned and helping others prepare. "We're not just looking out for ourselves," one resident said. "We're creating a network that makes it harder for anything like this to ever succeed again." Mark appreciated the shift in tone. What started as fear had turned into confidence. The families weren't hiding behind locked doors, they were standing together. In the following weeks, Mark worked with local officials to create a verified identification program for HOA staff and service workers. Residents could now check credentials with a phone app, ensuring only trusted individuals were allowed on the property. The imposters had tried to create fear and confusion, but instead they'd awakened a community determined to stay strong. As Mark walked Ethan to school, one morning, he noticed more parents out front, waving to one another, sharing coffee, and watching out for the kids. It felt like more than just a neighborhood now. It felt like home, protected, connected, and built on trust. And Mark knew, deep down, they were ready for whatever came next. The community that had once only exchanged small talk at mailboxes now worked together like a well-trained unit. Evening walks turned into informal patrols. Front porch conversations included updates on safety measures. What began as a response to an unsettling event had grown into something stronger: a neighborhood built on trust and teamwork. At the heart of this transformation was Mark, though he'd never asked for recognition. Neighbors now looked to him as the steady voice in times of uncertainty. He remained humble, rarely speaking about his past in the military unless asked, but his calm confidence spoke volumes. When Mark spoke, people listened not because he raised his voice, but because of how he carried himself. On a breezy Saturday morning, Mark hosted a self-awareness and safety session at the local community center. He brought a whiteboard, some diagrams, and more importantly, his time. You don't have to be trained for combat to protect your home or your family, Mark told the room of attentive neighbors. Most of the time, the strongest defense is simply being aware and working together. He taught simple things: how to identify real credentials, how to calmly question unfamiliar visitors, and when to call for help. He even gave examples of how posture and tone could de-escalate tense situations. During the break, a teenage boy named Ryan approached him. "Mr. Carter, I know I'm just a kid, but is there anything I can do to help too?" Mark smiled. Being alert is helping. You see something that doesn't feel right, you tell someone. Every one of us has a role. Doesn't matter how young or old. Ryan nodded proudly. Meanwhile, Mark continued working behind the scenes with the police. The officers had grown to respect him not just because of his background, but for his thoughtfulness and his desire to support, not command. One officer told him, "You've done more to unite this neighborhood than any official notice we could have sent." Mark appreciated the comment, but redirected the praise. "The people made the difference. All I did was help connect the dots. At home, life returned to a new version of normal. Ethan was sleeping better, no longer asking why the strange men had come to their door. He'd started drawing pictures of superheroes again, only now. The hero looked suspiciously like his dad. Claire kept things grounded, reminding Mark to rest, to breathe, and to take joy in the little things. Even warriors need quiet, she'd say, handing him a mug of tea on late nights. One day, Claire suggested something unexpected. Why don't we organize a neighborhood celebration? Mark blinked. A celebration. Not just for safety. She said, for unity. For growth. We've been through a lot. Maybe we deserve a good moment. The idea caught on quickly. Within a week, the community planned a block party complete with food trucks, games for kids, music, and even a safety booth set up by local officers. On the day of the event, laughter echoed through the streets. Children ran freely while parents chatted, old neighbors made new friends, and people lingered longer than usual. Feeling connected in a way that only shared experience could create, Mark stood at the edge of the gathering, watching it all unfold. Ryan waved at him from the bounce house line. An older couple thanked him for his help, and Claire, with Ethan on her hip, smiled from across the yard. This, Mark realized, was the real reward, not the recognition, not the headlines, but this moment. Safety, togetherness, and a community stronger than fear. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the neighborhood, Mark walked home with his family. He knew life wasn't perfect. There would always be unknowns. But now, he didn't feel like he was guarding his home alone. He was part of something bigger, and that made all the difference. Weeks passed since the neighborhood block party, and the community still carried the warmth of that day. Smiles lasted longer. Doors were kept open just a little wider. The quiet sense of unity remained not loud or forced, but steady and natural. Like a current beneath the surface, Mark Carter had returned to his peaceful routines. Morning runs, weekend breakfasts with Ethan, quiet evenings on the porch with Claire. But there was a new dimension to it, all something earned. The neighborhood was safe again. Yes, but it was also connected in ways it had never been before. One crisp morning, Mark sat on the porch watching the school bus roll down the street. Ethan waved from the window with a big grin on his face. Ah! Mark waved back and took a sip of his coffee. Ah! Claire stepped out a moment later, wrapping her cardigan a little tighter. It's quiet again, she said with a peaceful smile. Mark nodded. It is. But it's not the same kind of quiet. She tilted her head. What do you mean? Mark leaned back in his chair. Before it was quiet because no one was really paying attention. Now it's quiet because we're ready. Claire smiled, understanding completely. Across the street, neighbors walked their dogs and chatted over fences. One of the younger residents was helping an older couple carrying groceries. A teenager rode by on his skateboard, slowing just enough to flash a thumbs up at Mark. It was a small thing, but meaningful. That afternoon, Mark received a letter from the police department. It was short and sincere, a thank you for his support, with an invitation to help consult on future community outreach programs. Mark wasn't sure what he would say to them yet, but he appreciated the gesture. It reminded him that his actions had made a difference beyond his street. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer with a few other mementos from the past few months. He didn't need awards or certificates. The safety of his son and the smiles of his neighbors were enough still. There was one thing he felt compelled to do that weekend. Mark stood in front of a packed community meeting, not to give instructions, but simply to thank everyone. When those men showed up pretending to be something they weren't. I didn't know how far this would go, he said, but I knew I couldn't let fear dictate how we live. He paused and glanced around the room. What I didn't expect was how many of you would step forward to each in your own way. And that's what makes a neighborhood stronger than any threat. You didn't just wait for someone else to fix it. You took responsibility. You stayed calm. You watched out for each other. There was quiet applause, and a few people nodded, clearly moved. Mark smiled. We can't always predict what might come our way. But if we keep standing together, I know this community can face anything. After the meeting, people lingered again. Conversations flowed easily. Children played nearby. It felt less like a safety seminar and more like a family gathering. Back at home, Ethan was already asking what their weekend plans were. Can we go fishing, Dad? He asked. Mark laughed. Of course we can, Claire added, as long as you don't turn it into a survival training session again. Mark chuckled. No promises. As they packed up for the trip, Mark looked around their home, the home he had protected not just with strength, but with composure, cooperation, and quiet resilience. This chapter had been unexpected. It started with tension, false threats, and uncertain motives. But it ended with unity, courage, and something far more lasting than fear: trust. Mark didn't know what would come next, but he knew he and his community were ready. And as they drove off for their family outing, the neighborhood stood behind them, alert, safe, and strong.